the cliff notes of it are always going to sound 100% one way versus 0% the other way for the most part.
Sure.
But the reality is, I don't know if I'm looking at this too simplistically, but you talk about him as a thinking of himself as a general. When I've looked at the timelines of how easily he was able to take places at the beginning, but then also how quickly he got involved on other fronts, to me, he essentially started like a four-front war.
He did.
He was in North Africa. He went west through France. He was trying to go north to Britain, and also declaring war on the U.S. when they got caught in the middle of it, and then tries to go east into the Soviet Union. And sometimes I'm grateful he was like a methed out crackhead, because if he had taken his time and done one at a time, this could be, maybe I'm looking at it too simplistically, but this could be a very different world right now.
I agree. I think that if invading the Soviet Union when he did was a bad idea, then might, and again, remember, he had a pact with Stalin. Stalin wasn't going to attack him anytime soon, but I think he was paranoid about it. And I also think, too, he wanted to do the Napoleon thing, it's like capture Moscow, which turned out to be the ultimate failure, just to get so close and then you get stuck out there. And, their supply lines were, forever long. On top of that, they had, so brutalized the Soviet people all the way through the, burning buildings and with people inside and, raping and pillaging. Basically, the Soviets couldn't wait to get revenge. And when you look at the Soviet Union, it is a very, very big place. Like the Ukraine is so far away from Moscow, and Ukraine was the Soviet Union's breadbasket just before the war. So it was vitally important to get all these things. So Hitler wasn't just driving towards Moscow; he was fighting a war across that whole Soviet front. And it doesn't matter how many. And you think that all the men in Germany are doing all this fighting, but the Russians had so many more bodies, and they lost so many people.
Yeah. What was the number? Can we look that up, Alessi? Total number of casualties, Soviet Union, World War II. It's an insane number. Because obviously then we had the whole Cold War with them, so this was a little bit ignored politically. But yeah, the Soviet Union suffered around 27 million casualties during World War II, including both military and civilian deaths from war-related causes, which is, all Nazi Germany. Yeah, basically, which is just like,
it's crazy, and we lost a lot of men, but nowhere near 27 million.
Not like that.
Yeah,
that's one of the arguments you hear now with, I guess, like neo-history or whatever, where I was not trying to do that, but that did land a certain way. Sorry, but fine. Like they talk about, well, you could have avoided having 40 million people die or whatever. And to me, I'm like, so 40 million people could have died over the next 20 years while he's like trying to take control of other shit around the country, including around the world, including here maybe?
Yeah.
Like, is that, am I wrong? Am I going crazy here? Or is that a common sense thought?
No, it's a common sense thought. I just don't think a lot of people, like I said before, a lot of people don't know history. And they kind of make up their own history in their heads as they go along, or they're whatever the latest thing they hear on the internet or some newscast, and they just go with it.
Now here's the other thing there, psychologically, and I wonder if you've run into this, like when you're doing your research throughout your many books, but it's like history is written by the victors, and so the cliff notes of it are always going to sound 100% one way versus 0% the other way for the most part.
Sure.
But the reality is, even the good guys have some bad people or do some bad things along the way. I always give the example of the Revolutionary War, which is another one I study really closely. It's like, we were definitely the good guys. I'm very glad we did that. Revolution was great. A lot of amazing people on our side. Glad George Washington was the general. But it's like, we did some violent shit too,
stuff, yeah,
right? And there are even things that are recorded in history. They're written about in the books. It's not like they're ignored. That it's just when you're giving, again, like the cliff notes of it, no one ever brings that one up,
right?
And so my point is, people are not perfect. Even the most obvious situations have some little nuance somewhere, just because something got ignored after the records were put down. But the reality is, let's say 90 to 95% of what we're told is mostly true or completely on the right track. What I find now is that people will maybe find that 5-10%, and then because they find that, lift that up and take that and say,
Right.
therefore, none of it's true.
Right. I agree with that. Just because as you were talking, I was thinking about how it was very common for the U.S., for Americans to shoot German prisoners if there was no place to put them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and because we won the war, there were no prosecution for war crimes. The Germans did the same thing, and now they stand at like the Malmedy massacre, the Battle of the Bulge. We look at that as this huge atrocity, and it was, but it's wartime, and kind of putting this all back into the book world. You talk about that 5%. The 95% is what most history books are about. Like Taking Midway, it's
pull that in just a little bit.
Okay, yeah. And so Taking Midway is it's the history. But if there was 5% that was different, and somebody found that 5% and said, "Oh, this is a great book," because they want to blow it up, so they write a book just about that 5%. And what that does is that book gets out there, gets in it. So what I'm saying is that you take that 5%, you make a book about it, you make a documentary about it, then people begin shifting the argument. It's like, oh, that's the real story. That's not just the fringe story. That's the real story.
Right.
That's the way we need to think about it.
Right. We should create an environment, though, and we don't always do this, in fairness, where it's okay to ask questions on things, to try to delve deeper. And what I feel like happens is people will ask questions on some narrative about something, and they'll be told, "Fuck you, shut up, you're not allowed to ask that." And then they go, "Well, fuck you, I am going to ask that." And it creates this bigger and bigger problem, and then they become cognitively incentivized to find the confirmation bias that they're feeling about, oh, maybe I need to look at this a lot deeper. And so I empathize with where that comes from. I just wish we could have more like, I don't know, like not academia, but like academic, meaning productive discussions about these things in the open, where different people, whether it be you or other historians, can talk about this and say, well, I found this. Oh, you found that? I found this. That's interesting. I wonder if those, you know what I mean? Like an exchange of ideas.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore.
No.
And here's a good point. Like if the neighborhood I live in is politically mixed. Everybody, we have firefighters, we have cops, we have construction workers, we have, me, the lone writer. But, we have people who do, an executive for Home Depot. We have all these people in this neighborhood. But when we get together and the subject of history or modern history comes up or in comparisons to other stuff, people like me who spends all his time studying history, who makes a living, being focused and immersed in history, I'm not going to speak up because what happens is in a situation like that, you become the know-it-all, and no one wants to listen to the know-it-all. They want to listen to whatever they heard on TV or the internet, and you get just this thing. And there's so many times, and not just with my neighborhood, but in public discourse, where I want to correct people or say, no, you're not right. But again, I don't want to be the know-it-all guy, and it's really not my place, unless it's a forum like this where I can actually talk freely about history without sounding like a pompous ass.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're making an amazing point right here, which is that if you're just a good sport about things and then happen to know some things as well, people are going to ask you questions, and then it's going to be able to get that out there as truth. Unfortunately, in the defense of the people who do go full contrarian, there are a lot of people sitting in a seat like yours who have access to a lot of information, have studied it throughout their life and written all these books, who are like, no, you can't talk with us. And exactly. They do want to be the know-it-all who tells everyone, no, this is how it is, which causes that endless loop.
I kind of actually get into that, because I don't have a PhD. I don't. You
don't? Get the fuck out.
Right, exactly. So if I get into a room of academics, I'm just the guy who writes history books. I'm not like Mr. Smarty Pants, and it's almost like I don't have a voice. And I want to say, but yeah, I do that. Like every book is a graduate degree.
Yes. I completely agree with that.
It's like you said. There are no dialogues. There are no conversations. Everybody wants to find their place in the pecking order and make sure that nobody else kind of usurps them.
Yeah. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.